Humanity was recruited to lose. That's the line nobody explained to Sergeant Elena Voss until the day it almost got her whole team killed. Right now, 6 minutes and 40 seconds stood between Anchor Station V and the resumption of a war that had been quietly paused for 311 years. 6 minutes and 40 seconds, a blinking amber authorization code, and a decision that no human, KRYN, or Vothari mind was designed to make alone. "Talk to me, Birdie," Voss said, not looking up from a console. "Talk to you about what? The math that's about to start a war, or the math that's about to start a war faster?" Private Marcus, Birdie. Okafor's fingers hadn't stopped moving across the haptic panel in 4 minutes. Sweat had soaked through his collar. "Sarge, the resolution loop isn't converging. It hasn't converged in 4 minutes. It's supposed to converge in under 9 seconds. Every single time. For 3 centuries. Something had broken. Nobody yet knew what. Corporal Deshaun Ruiz was already moving toward the relay bay, boots hammering the deck, plating in a rhythm that didn't match the calm in his voice. "Sarge, I can pull the manual override, but you know what that means." What it meant was this. 2 alien empires, locked in a stalemate neither could break and neither dared end, were about to find out that the machine keeping them from destroying each other had stopped trusting itself. And 3 humans, attached to this station as glorified rubber stamps, were the only variable standing between silence and slaughter. Nobody had told them that before today. 6 hours earlier, none of it had felt like war. Anchor Station V hung in the dead space between the KRYN assembly and the Vothari Concord, like a held breath, a modest, ring-shaped structure bristling with sensor arrays, built by neither empire and trusted, barely, by both. It existed for exactly one purpose: to run the threshold calculation, the algorithm that had kept 2 logic-driven civilizations from annihilating each other since a war that neither side liked to name directly. They called it, in the sterile language shared between species, the standing peace. Elena Voss had been briefed on none of the details. She'd been briefed on a schedule. Verify the daily resolution. Countersign the output. Eat breakfast that tasted like recycled cardboard. Repeat. Auxiliary Voss. The voice belonged to Administrator Thesk, and it always sounded like a spreadsheet being read aloud, flat, precise, faintly disappointed in the universe for containing variables. Thesk was KRYN, which meant he was tall in the wrong places, his limbs jointed like a marionette assembled by someone who'd only heard bipeds described secondhand. His skin held a permanent sheen, like wet slate. "The morning calculation is prepared. Your counter-signature is required within the standard window." "Right." Voss set down her cup. "Same as yesterday. Statistically indistinguishable from yesterday, yes." She'd learned, over 4 months on V, that Thesk meant this as reassurance. KRYN found comfort in repetition, the way humans found comfort in blankets. Across the ops deck, the Vothari presence manifested differently, not as a body exactly, but as a soft distributed hum along the section of hull the Concord had grown into the station like coral fusing to rock. A voice rose from a cluster of resonance nodes, layered, several throats speaking in overlapping harmony, that somehow resolved into a single sentence. "We concur with the administrator's assessment. The calculation proceeds within expected parameters. I request the human counter-signature at your convenience." Voss had never fully gotten used to the way the Vothari ancillary spoke, the we sliding into our mid-sentence, like a chorus remembering, halfway through the verse, that it was also a single person. Its name, or the closest translatable approximation, was Mren, a fragment, a single consciousness butted off from the larger Vothari Concord mind and sent out to represent the whole, while still, somehow, being only a sliver of it. "Countersigning," Voss said, and pressed her thumb to the reader. It was, she thought, the single most boring superpower in the galaxy. Pressing a thumb to a reader once a day so 2 empires didn't blow each other into debris. She'd asked early on why the calculation needed a human at all if it ran itself. Redundancy protocol, the file had said. Auxiliary chaos verification per Article 14 of the Standing Peace. Nobody had explained what chaos verification meant. She'd assumed it was ceremonial, a vestige, Something bureaucratic left over from whatever treaty had first bolted humanity onto this arrangement, back when Earth had barely finished proving it could survive first contact without setting itself on fire. She was wrong. She just didn't know it yet. The alarm didn't sound like an alarm. That was the first wrong thing. It sounded like silence, the threshold calculation status line, which had blinked a steady green resolved in 9 seconds, pulse every single day since Voss had arrived, simply stopped blinking. It hung on amber. Then it hung on amber for 4 seconds, which had never happened. Then 8. Thesk. Voss was already at the console. Talk to me. For the first time in 4 months, Administrator Thesk's flat voice cracked into something that wasn't flat at all. The calculation has failed to converge. Failed how? It has not failed. It is not converging. There's a difference. Thesk's long fingers moved across his own interface with a speed that made the panel chime in protest. The threshold calculation resolves probability-weighted deterrence postures for both fleets stationed along the border. It has produced a single stable resolution every day for 311 years. Today it is producing 2. 2 what? 2 contradictory resolutions, equally weighted. The system cannot select between them without external input. Birdie, arriving at a job with a ration bar still in his mouth, spoke around it. Okay, so, via a coin flip. Problem solved. The stakes preclude a coin flip, Private. Thesk didn't look at him. One resolution authorizes both fleets to stand down as scheduled. The other authorizes immediate escalation to border contingency status, which, under existing treaty language, cannot be rescinded once triggered. It is a one-way door. If the calculation selects escalation, both fleets begin general mobilization within the hour, and the standing peace terminates. Silence settled over the ops deck like dust. So don't pick that one, Birdie said. We do not pick, said Mren's chorus voice, and for the first time Voss heard something in it that sounded almost like the Volthari collective was afraid. Several throats speaking slightly out of sync, as if the fragment sending the words back to the greater whole was having trouble deciding what to report. The calculation picks. That is the entire function of the threshold system. Neither empire trusts the other to select. Neither empire trusts itself to select. The math selects because the math has no motive. Except today the math's got 2 motives, Ruiz said, arriving last, out of breath, and it can't tell them apart. Thesk's slate-colored face turned toward Voss with something that looked, disturbingly, like relief. This is why the auxiliary contingent exists, he said. This is what your species was recruited to do. Voss felt something cold settle behind her sternum. Nobody told us that. You were told you were chaos verification, Thesk said. I assumed the implications were self-evident. Explain the implications, Administrator. Right now. Thesk's jaw. If it was a jaw, clicked twice, the KRYN equivalent, she'd come to learn, of choosing words carefully. The threshold calculation is, at its foundation, a decision engine built from 2 logic architectures, KRYN optimization and Volthari consensus. Both are exceptionally powerful. Both are also, under certain conditions, subject to a mathematical pathology neither race can resolve internally, a closed loop of self-referential certainty. When a KRYN optimizer becomes convinced 2 outcomes are equally optimal, it cannot break the tie, because tie-breaking requires accepting an arbitrary input, and arbitrary input is anathema to KRYN cognition. When a Volthari consensus mind reaches equipoise between 2 group truths, it likewise cannot break the tie, because doing so would require one part of the collective asserting itself over the rest, and Volthari cognition treats internal dissent as a wound. And humans, Voss said slowly. Just pick. Humans, Thesk said. Select outcomes constantly, with incomplete information, for reasons even you cannot always articulate to yourselves, and then live with the result without requiring retroactive justification. You call this a flaw. We built an entire alliance architecture around it as a feature. Birdie made a small, strangled noise. With a coin flip. You are considerably more sophisticated than a coin flip, Thesk said, in a tone that suggested this was meant kindly. But functionally, yes. The amber light on the console blinked to 11 seconds. 12. So what do we do? Voss said. You select, said Mren. One of you places a hand on the manual override interface and chooses stand down or escalate. The system will trust a human choice where it cannot trust its own. Based on what information? Based on none, Fesk said. That is, again, rather the point. The relay base smelled like ozone and cold metal, and the manual override sat in the center of it like an altar nobody had wanted to build. A simple two-position lever beneath a countdown clock that had, in the last 90 seconds, gone from theoretical to very, very real. 6 minutes and 40 seconds. Now 5 minutes 10. We flip it to stand down, Ruiz said. Obviously, that's the sane option. Why are we even discussing this? Because I don't like being told to pick blind, Voss said. Nobody's asking you to enjoy it, Sarge. Fesk's voice came over the comm, tight with something that in a human would have been called panic, and in a KRYN was called, apparently, elevated procedural urgency. I must inform you, the reason the calculation is split is not without cause. Sensor sweeps 20 minutes ago detected an unscheduled Vothari fleet movement near the border relay. Unscheduled movement is, under treaty terms, grounds for the calculation to weigh escalation as viable. If you select stand down and the movement proves hostile, you will have disarmed the correct response. And if I select escalation and it was nothing, then you will have triggered an irreversible war based on an administrative error. Great, Bertie said. Love this job. Mren's voice, this time, arrived alone in Voss's earpiece, not broadcast to the whole bay, just to her, quiet enough that it took her a second to realize it was a private channel. Sergeant, the fleet movement was ours. I can tell you that much before I am required to route it through channels. It was not aggression. It was... The chorus stumbled, several throats disagreeing mid-word. An internal matter. A dissenting fragment attempted an unauthorized course correction. It has been recalled. So it wasn't a threat. It should not have been perceived as one, but I cannot certify that with the confidence the calculation requires, because I do not know what the sensors registered, only what my own collective intended. Sergeant, this is precisely the failure mode your species exists to correct. We know our own minds and cannot verify our own actions. You know neither, and somehow decide anyway. Voss looked at the lever. For minutes, 40 seconds. Ruiz, give me eyes on that fleet position. Now, Ruiz was already moving. Hands flying across a secondary panel he wasn't technically cleared to access, muttering half under his breath, half to the machine. Pulling raw sensor feed, bypassing the resolution engine, patching direct. The panel flared red and dumped him out. Ruiz. Lockout. The instant I try to pull raw data outside the approved channel, station security flags it as tampering with the threshold process. I just tripped something. 3 minutes, 50 seconds. Fesk's voice again, tighter now. Corporal Ruiz's access attempt is registered on the KRYN oversight log as an unauthorized intrusion. I am required to note this formally. Note it later. Voss snapped. Can you get me the sensor data or not? I can. It requires authorization above auxiliary clearance. Then authorize it. I am attempting to. My own authorization is currently. A pause. Fesk's version of gritted teeth. Contested. Contested by who? By my superiors, Sergeant, who are currently instructing me, through a channel I did not expect to be active today, to allow the calculation to resolve toward escalation. The bay went very quiet. Say that again. Voss said, I am under instruction, new instruction, received in the last 90 seconds, to permit, or at minimum not obstruct, the escalation resolution. Why the hell would your own command want a war? Fesk did not answer immediately. When he did, his voice had lost its flatness entirely, replaced by something careful and cold. I do not know the full reasoning. I know only the fragment of the order I was given, which references your species contingent by designation, not by name. I believe, I am not certain, but I believe this crisis is being used. Used how? To remove a variable my superiors have decided has become too influential to the outcome of this standing peace. You, Sergeant, your team, the auxiliary contingent as a category. Thesk's next words came slower, as if he were testing each one for structural integrity before releasing it. I believe some among the KRYN command structure have concluded that humanity's role in breaking threshold deadlocks has begun to matter more to the stability of this peace than either empire's own command authority. That is an intolerable dependency. From a KRYN perspective, I believe they intend to let this crisis resolve toward war, specifically because the failure will be attributable to a human decision, and in the aftermath, the auxiliary program, and everyone attached to it, will be dissolved. Along with, I suspect, this station. 3 minutes. Bertie's voice, when it came, was very small. Dissolved like, reassigned dissolved or... I do not have specifics, Thesk said. I have inference. I am telling you because I find, to my own considerable surprise, that I do not wish to comply. There is a particular kind of silence that happens when 3 people realize, at the same moment, that the ground they've been standing on was never load-bearing. Voss had felt it once before, years ago, in a different war, in a different silence, right before a building came down with people she loved still inside it. She recognized the shape of it now. Okay. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. Okay. New plan. We don't have confirmed hostile intent from the Vothari movement. We don't have confirmation this is a setup, either. Just Thesk's read on a fragment of an order. 2 minutes 40. We need more information, and the 2 systems that could give it to us are both locked. There's a third option, Ruiz said quietly, which is, the relay array feeding raw sensor telemetry sits outside the threshold firewall, physically outside it, in the exposed section of the station ring. If I go out there and pull a manual tap directly off the array, I bypass the lockout entirely. It's not authorized access. It's not access at all. It's just cutting a wire and reading what's on it. That section's got no shielding, Ruiz. It's rated for maintenance drones, not people. I know what it's rated for. You'd be exposed to the relay's own emission field for however long it takes. I know that too. He was already grabbing a suit from the bay locker, movements fast and unhesitating in a way that made something in Voss's chest go tight and cold. Sarge, we got 2 minutes 20 and 2 bad options that both end with maybe a war. I can get you real numbers in 90 seconds. That's the job. Let me do the job. She wanted to say no. She opened her mouth to say no. Go, she said instead, and hated herself a little for it, and knew even as she said it that she would make the same choice again, because 90 seconds of real data against blind escalation wasn't a trade she could refuse, not with a war on the other side of the wrong answer. This was the no-win shape of it. There was no version of the next 2 minutes where nobody paid a price. Ruiz was through the airlock in under 30 seconds. What happened in the next 90 seconds happened almost too fast for narration, the way real crises always do. Not in tidy paragraphs, but in overlapping fragments, radio chatter and alarms, and a young man's breathing going ragged over an open channel while a countdown clock ran out of patience. I've got the tap, Ruiz said, voice crackling with interference from the exposed array's field. Pulling telemetry now. Sensor ghost. Sensor ghost. The movements, Sarge. The movement reads as a single vessel, small, non-military signature. It's not a fleet. Whoever flagged this as fleet movement misread the sensor return. It's one ship. Copy that, encode it, send it to the override. Sending. A burst of static, a flare of alarm behind his voice. Field stronger out here than rated. I'm getting exposure warnings. It's fine. I'm almost done. Ruiz, get back inside the second that data's through. 1 second, Sarge. The encoding's not there. Sent. Confirm you have it. Voss looked down at the console. A new packet had landed in the override queue, tagged with Ruiz's field ID. Timestamped 4 seconds ago. She had 11 seconds left on the countdown. She opened the packet. The data was garbled, not wrong, but incomplete. A transmission clipped midstream by interference, missing its final verification checksum. It showed a single vessel. It did not show, because the transmission had been cut short, what that vessel was carrying, or where it was headed, or whether the checksum that would have confirmed the reading as trustworthy had ever actually been generated. 8 seconds. It's not verified, Thesk said, reading the same feed. The packet lacks confirmation. I cannot certify this data meets the calculation's evidentiary threshold. I don't have 8 seconds to get a better one. 5 seconds. Mren's voice, quiet, almost gentle, cutting through everything else. Sergeant, this is the moment. This is what you were built, what you were recruited for. Not to have the answer, to choose without it. 3 seconds. Voss put her hand on the lever. She thought, absurdly, of her grandmother, who used to say that most of the worst decisions of her life had felt exactly like the best ones right up until the moment they didn't, and that the only difference between courage and disaster was which side of the coin came up, and that you made the choice anyway, every time, because refusing to choose was its own kind of choice, and usually the worst one available. She pulled the lever to stand down. The countdown clock froze at 1 second and did not resume. For 3 full seconds, nothing happened, which was its own kind of agony. The not knowing stretched out across a silence that felt like the entire station was holding its breath alongside her. Then the status line on the main console, which had blinked amber for 4 minutes and 11 seconds, went green and stayed green, and the word standing peace maintained scrolled across 3 separate readouts in 3 different alien alphabets and 1 human one. Voss let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding since the airlock cycled. Ruiz, she said into the comm, Ruiz, get back in here. We're clear. The peace held. Silence. Ruiz. Report. Static. Then faint. Here, Sarge. I'm coming in. The airlock cycle took 19 seconds. It felt longer than the countdown had. He came through under his own power, which was the first good sign, and collapsed against the bulkhead the moment the suit seal released, which was the first bad one. Birdie was at his side before Voss finished crossing the bay, already pulling up the suit's exposure log on his wrist display, and she watched his face change. The way a person's face changes when the numbers on a screen stop being numbers and start being a sentence they don't want to finish reading. Sarge. Birdie's voice had gone very flat, the way voices go flat right before they break. Sarge, the field strength out there, the exposure reading. It's not survivable adjacent. It's not a you'll feel sick for a while number. It's, I know what it is, Birdie, Ruiz said, quiet from the floor. He'd pulled his helmet off, and his face was gray in a way that had nothing to do with the station's lighting. I ran the math before I went out. I ran it in about 4 seconds, actually, which is not a lot of time to think about your own funeral. And let me tell you, that's a genuinely strange thing to discover about yourself. Don't, Voss said. Don't you dare make a joke right now. Sarge, if I don't make a joke right now, I'm going to have to think about the other thing, and I'd really rather not, if it's all the same to you. His hand found hers, and his grip was already weaker than it should have been. Did it work? Peace held. You were right. It was one ship, not a fleet. Good. He closed his eyes for a second, and when he opened them again, there was something almost peaceful in his face, which was somehow worse than if he'd looked afraid. Good. That's okay. That's good. We're getting you to medical. Right now. Sarge. His voice was very gentle. I've seen radiation exposure charts before. I know what mine looks like. You don't have to do the thing where you pretend for my benefit. I'd rather spend whatever's left being honest with you than comfortable. Something in Voss's chest cracked clean through, and for one unguarded second, in front of Thesk's cameras and Mren's listening nodes and a station full of 2 other species, watching a human sergeant fail to hold her composure, she let it show. You didn't have to go out there, she said, and her voice wasn't steady at all now. I could have ordered someone else. I could have. You could have done a lot of things, and every single one of them takes longer than the time we had. Ruiz said. I did the math. I made the choice. That's the job, right? Isn't that the whole thing Thesk just told us we're for? A weak, wrecked half-smile. Guess I'm real good at my job. Birdie broke, quietly and without ceremony, about 6 minutes later, in the corridor outside medical, sliding down the wall with his knees pulled up and his hands pressed hard against his own eyes, shaking in a way that had nothing dramatic about it and everything true. He's not going to make it, is he? He said, not really a question. The exposure. I saw the number, Sarge. I saw it before you made me stop looking, and it's not a number people walk away from. Voss sat down next to him on the deck, plating, because there wasn't anything else to do with her body. And for a while neither of them said anything. "I keep thinking about the recruitment posters," Bertie said eventually, voice thick. "Back on Earth. Joined the Interstellar Auxiliary Corps. They had this whole vibe, you know. Adventure, diplomacy, building bridges between civilizations. Nobody put, you will be asked to make blind guesses that decide whether two empires go to war, and sometimes the guess will cost somebody their life, on the poster." "No," Voss said. "They didn't." "Do you think they knew? When they signed the treaty? Do you think whoever signed us up for this actually understood what chaos verification meant? Or did they just see humans get invited to sit at the adult table and sign without reading past page 1? "I don't know," Voss said honestly. "I don't think it matters right now." "It matters to me." He wiped his face with the back of his hand, hard, angry at his own tears in the particular way young soldiers often are. "It matters because he just paid for something none of us actually agreed to, because none of us knew what we were actually agreeing to." Voss didn't have an answer for that. She put a hand on his shoulder instead, and they sat there together in the quiet. And for once neither of them tried to fill the silence with anything that wasn't true. Fesk found her 40 minutes later in the observation gallery, where she'd gone because it was the one place on the station without a screen showing a countdown or a status log, just a long transparent bulkhead and the slow wheel of stars. "Medical reports Corporal Ruiz's condition as terminal," Fesk said, without preamble, because KRYN didn't do preambles for grief the way humans did. "I am told the timeline is measured in hours, not days." "I know. I wish to say—" He stopped, started again. "I do not have a native framework for what I am about to say. So I ask your patience if it emerges incorrectly. I am experiencing something I believe your species would call guilt." Voss turned to look at him properly. "For the exposure order? For all of it. For allowing my own command's instruction to nearly cost you the peace. And for the fact that even now, even having disobeyed that instruction, even having assisted you, the outcome still cost your team a life. KRYN cognition does not typically retain distress over outcomes we did not directly cause. I find I am retaining it anyway. I do not know what to do with the sensation. It is inefficient. It serves no optimization function, and yet it persists." "Welcome to being a person administrator," Voss said, more gently than she felt. Fesk was quiet for a long moment, his slate features unreadable in the starlight. "I have decided to file a formal dissent against my own command's handling of this incident. This will very likely end my career, and possibly expose me to disciplinary action beyond that. I calculate the probability of a favorable outcome for myself at less than 9%. "Why do it then?" "Because," he said slowly, as if discovering the sentence as he spoke it, "the correct action and the optimal action are not, in this instance, the same action, and I find, inefficiently, irrationally, against every principle I was raised to hold, that I have chosen the correct one anyway. I believe this is called loyalty. I believe I caught it from your corporal, the way one catches an infection. I am not certain I mind." Something in Voss's chest that had been clenched tight since the countdown finally, slightly loosened. "That's the most human thing I've ever heard a KRYN say." "I am aware," Fesk said, with something that might, in the right light, have been the ghost of a smile. "I find that I am also, to my own considerable discomfort, not unhappy about it." Mren requested a private audience an hour after that, routed through a channel Voss hadn't known the station had, arriving not as sound through speakers, but as a kind of pressure behind her sternum, translated a half-second later into words. "Sergeant, I must tell you something, and I ask that you allow me to finish before you respond, because what I am about to say will require you to reconsider events you believe you already understand." "Go ahead." The threshold calculation was not designed by the KRYN Assembly or the Vothari Concord, though both empires believe otherwise, or have allowed themselves to believe otherwise, across 3 centuries of institutional memory. It was designed, in its foundational architecture, by early human contact specialists, the first human diplomatic delegation to reach this border, during the initial war, before either empire had learned to speak your language properly. Your species did not join an existing peace system as an auxiliary tiebreaker. Your species built the tie-breaking function into the system from its inception, because your delegation understood, faster than either empire did, that two purely rational architectures locked in conflict will always eventually reach a point neither can resolve alone. You did not join us as helpers. You are not, and never were, the auxiliary component of this peace. Voss felt the floor of her understanding tilt sideways. You're saying we're not attached to the system. We are the system. I am saying the system cannot function without the specific cognitive category your species provides, and has never been able to. And both empires have spent 3 centuries quietly erasing that fact from their own institutional records, because neither wished to admit that its own survival depended on a species it considered, at the time of first contact, primitive. You were not recruited as a minor auxiliary contribution to an existing peace. You were, from the very first calculation ever run, the load-bearing structure the entire peace was built around. We simply never told you, because telling you would have meant admitting it to ourselves. The silence that followed felt enormous. That's why Thesk's command wanted us gone, Voss said slowly. Not because we'd become too influential, because they finally understood how influential we'd always been, and it terrified them. Yes, Wren said, and for the first time Voss heard the chorus speak, in something like unison. No fragmenting, no disagreement between throats. A single collective voice arriving at a single collective grief. I have known this, we have known this, the whole Concord mind has always known this, encoded in memory too old for most fragments to access consciously. And I have carried it in silence, because the alternative was admitting that the Vothari Concord's entire peace, with the KRYN assembly has, for 311 years, depended on a species we treated as a footnote. I did not know how to say this to you before today. I am not certain I know how to say it correctly now. But your corporal did not die for a footnote, Sergeant. He died maintaining the actual keystone of this peace. I wished you to know that before. The chorus faltered, several throats losing the thread at once, before it becomes too late to matter to him. It was not too late. Barely. Voss made it to medical with 11 minutes left, by the doctor's careful estimate, and found Rees propped up against a pile of blankets that weren't doing anything for a condition blankets couldn't touch. Bertie sitting close on one side with red-rimmed eyes, holding his friend's hand like letting go might speed something up. "Hey, Sarge," Ruiz said, and his voice was thinner now, but the humor in it hadn't gone anywhere, which somehow made it harder to bear, not easier. "Come to see the miracle worker off." "Come to tell you something," Voss said, and sat down on his other side. "Mren just told me the truth about what we are out here, what humans actually are, to this whole piece." "Yeah, better be good. I'm on a schedule." She told him. All of it. The founding architecture, the erased history, the 3 centuries of quiet dependency neither empire had wanted to admit to. She watched his face change as she spoke, the exhaustion in it giving way, slowly, to something that looked almost like wonder. "So we weren't the backup plan," he said, when she'd finished. "We were never the backup plan. No, we were the whole reason the plan worked." "Yeah." He was quiet for a moment, staring at the ceiling, and when he spoke again his voice had gone soft in a way she hadn't heard from him before. That's actually kind of a relief, you know. I spent the last hour thinking maybe I traded my life for a rounding error, a ceremonial signature nobody actually needed. Turns out I traded it for the thing the whole piece was built on. A weak, real smile. That's a better trade. I can live with that. A pause, and the ghost of his old grin. "Well, you know what I mean. Deshawn." "I'm not scared, Sarge," he said, and it didn't sound like bravado. It sounded like something he genuinely arrived at alone, in the last hour, the way people sometimes do. "I got to pick. That's the whole thing, right? That's what Thesk said we're for. Not knowing the answer. Choosing anyway, and meaning it. I meant it. I'd choose it again." His grip on Bertie's hand tightened, just slightly. "Take care of the new guys when they come out here, Bertie. Tell them what it actually means before they find out the hard way like we did." "I will," Bertie said, and his voice broke completely on the second word. Ruiz's eyes found Voss's one more time. "Sarge, It was a good trade. Believe that part, okay? For me. I believe it, she said, and meant it, and held his hand until there was nothing left to hold onto but the fact of him having been there at all. The formal reclassification came through 11 days later, routed simultaneously to both the KRYN Assembly's Governing Council and the Vothari Concord's full collective consciousness, and from there, eventually, to Earth, a change of a single line of treaty language that had stood, unexamined, for 3 centuries. Human species status amended, from provisional auxiliary, expendable, to cognitive keystone species, protected under joint treaty protection. Administrator Thesk's formal descent had, against his own 9% calculation, succeeded, not because the KRYN Assembly suddenly valued sentiment, but because 3 centuries of quiet dependency, once exposed, could not be politically unwound without admitting an institutional cowardice neither empire wished on public record. Thesk kept his post. He also, Voss noticed, started leaving small silences in his reports where opinions used to go, as if he were, slowly and against every instinct in his species, learning to have some. Mren's fragment remained assigned to Anchor Station Vey, though something in the way the chorus spoke had changed, steadier now, less prone to fracturing mid-sentence, as though carrying the truth openly had cost it less than carrying it in secret ever had. Bertie stayed too, though he requested, and received, a transfer of his primary duty to training incoming auxiliary recruits, the ones who would come after, who would sit at the console someday, not knowing what chaos verification truly meant until the moment it mattered. He made sure, every single time, that they knew before that moment arrived. He kept a photo of Reese taped to the inside of his locker, and he told the story of the exposed relay array to every new recruit on their first day, unsanitized, unsoftened, exactly as it had happened. Voss stood in the observation gallery most evenings after that, watching the slow wheel of stars, thinking about the strange shape of the things she'd learned. That value isn't a quality some higher system measures and hands down from above, verified and certified and safe. It's something built, moment by moment, by whoever is willing to choose without certainty and live inside the consequence afterward, not because the choice is guaranteed to be right, but because refusing to choose is its own quiet catastrophe, and someone always has to be willing to hold the lever. Humanity had been recruited to lose, by every measure the universe's most rational minds could construct, recruited to be the flaw in 2 perfect systems, the imperfection neither empire could engineer out of itself. It turned out the flaw had been the foundation all along. 311 years, and counting, and the peace held, not despite the humans standing at its center, uncertain and imperfect and choosing anyway, but because of them. That was the part nobody had put on the recruitment poster. Voss thought, most evenings, that maybe they should.